I love both fantasy stories and musical theatre, which explains why the Lord of the Rings musical has had me so fascinated since I first found out it existed, which is why I was buying tickets for the revival of the show at the Watermill Theatre pretty much the minute they went on sale. And I want to talk to you about my experience reading Lord of the Rings and watching this show, doing a little comparison of how I found each of them. Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm a writer. I work in children's publishing. And as I mentioned, I'm a big fantasy fan, but I have to confess that until a couple of weeks ago, I had never read any of the Lord of the Rings. I had read The Hobbit, but that was about 10 years ago. Around the same time, I bought this copy of The Fellowship of the Ring, and I just got massive big book fear from it. And so I feel like a bit of a fraud, someone that claims to love fantasy, to never even have started this novel. But I have remedied that now. And the announcement of this new revival of the musical was exactly the kick I needed to finally open this book and give it a try at least. The Lord of the Rings musical is kind of legendary in that it was one of the most expensive musicals ever produced in London, if not anywhere. And commercially speaking, it was a bit of a disaster. It lost a load of money, it didn't run for anywhere near as long as planned. One of the cast members got injured by the set. It did not go well. But the music in this show is incredible. And I came across it, I think years after it had briefly run in London, and I was gutted that I never got to see it because at the time, I think I was quite young, and I also wasn't into Lord of the Rings, so it didn't appeal. And then I heard the music, and I was like, oh, I've missed out. And if it was such a disaster, what are the chances they're going to bring it back? So the excitement when I saw the announcement on Twitter that the Watermill was bringing this show back, I cannot quite explain. And so with my tickets bought for the last night of previews, it really was time to get reading. The last video I did like this was As You Like It, the Shakespeare play, which as a play you can read in a couple of hours. Was not going to be the same with this. I think I ended up with 2 weeks to read at least Fellowship. That was my goal. I had no expectation of getting through the full novel, doing all 3 parts in 2 weeks. I don't have that much spare time, but I wanted to at least have read the first part so I had an understanding of the world and Tolkien's writing style, just so I had a feel going into the show. If somehow you are not familiar with Lord of the Rings, very, very quick summary. This is a novel in 3 parts written by J.R.R. Tolkien. I always thought it was a trilogy, but it is just one enormous novel that had to be published in 6 books spread across 3 physical books. And we follow a hobbit, a small type of human-like creature called Frodo, who inherits a ring from his uncle Bilbo, the main character of The Hobbit. This ring is not good. It's powerful. It's not good. And Frodo is tasked with getting rid of it once and for all, because there is someone who wants it, and if they get it, things will be very, very bad for pretty much everyone in the whole of Middle-earth where this story is set. So he ends up with this group around him to help him get to where he needs to go. And it's this big fantasy epic. There are battles, there are creatures, and it is the fantasy. There's a reason that stories earlier than this, I think this was published in the 50s, stories before this that are vaguely fantasy-y are referred to as pre-Tolkien fantasy. He completely changed the game and he sort of paved the way for this new kind of epic quest adventure fantasy. And this is a book and a film series that lots of people are so attached to and so fond of. And I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to understand what this was all about. I think I've only seen the first 2 films, so I felt like that really wasn't enough before I went to see the musical. So I will hand you over to Past Me to show you how I got on with reading and show you a little bit of the show itself. So I am this far through, and they're still walking away from Hobbiton. They are still very much in the Shire. Some stuff has happened. We've met the Ring Riders and we've met our first set of elves. Very much still just walking through the Shire though. I'm having a nice time, but people weren't exaggerating when they talked about how much Tolkien loves to describe paths and walking and detailed conversations while walking down paths. So, quick update on my progress. I should have been able to get a lot of reading done on the train this week. I get the train into London 3 days a week, and then all the trains got cancelled. So I've only made it into the office 1 day this week, which has massively cut down my reading times. But then I remembered I got the free trial of BookBeat, the audiobook app, a while ago and hadn't really made use of it. So the last few days I have been letting Andy Serkis read the book to me, and that has caught me up massively. And also I've been able to listen to him doing all the voices and pronounce everything properly in Elvish, so that's been great. I'm now into book 2, the second half of this part of The Lord of the Rings, and it is all kicking off. We've gone from the first half, which is some boys out for a walk, basically, with some slight peril in the background, and now we're getting all the elf names and all the places and all the lore, and my brain is like, blah, but yeah, I'm still enjoying it. I am away this weekend for a hen do, so I don't know how much reading I'm going to get done then, but with the audiobook on the drive down and reading on the train on Monday, I am hopeful that I will get this finished in time for the show. We'll see. Good morning. I don't know whether you'll hear me over all the rain, but it is Monday morning, it is show day, and it is really rainy, and I'm just hoping it clears up by this evening, because this is not ideal for a show that starts and ends outside. I listened to some more of the audiobook yesterday, so I'm now about 80% of the way through, so I think if I read both ways on the train and listen to the audiobook in the office, I think I can get Fellowship done by the end of the day. We'll see. Hopefully I get that done, and hopefully it stops raining. So, as you saw in those clips, with the help of the audiobook, I managed to get through Fellowship before we went to see the show, and in the week or so since we went to see it, I have now finished The Two Towers. And for all that I'd given myself this thing about reading the book and not been able to touch it for like a decade, I really enjoyed it. There is a lot of talk about trees and the exact curve of paths, and there is a lot of walking and eating and sleeping, and there are a lot of men and very few women. It's not perfect. I think if it was written now, it would be edited very differently. But as I said earlier, this was the start of the fantasy genre as we know it, so I think we can allow it a couple of imperfections, because he was literally kind of creating the future of fantasy. And I love walking. It's one of my favourite things to do, so I didn't mind seeing them all going on their big walk adventure. No, he's not the most concise writer in the world, and if you just want action happening all the time, that's not going to happen in this book. But what you do get is this really rich world with these really real feeling characters, and you get lots of time to get to know them and watch them get to know each other, because a lot of them are strangers when they first become the Fellowship, so you get to watch as the group dynamics kind of evolve, and I don't think you'd get that if it was just rushing through, which I will talk about when I talk about the show in a little bit. I'm not great at fantasies where there's suddenly loads of lore thrown at you and loads of names and dates. My brain just kind of shuts down, and I was worried the whole book would be like that, and it wasn't, which is great. For the most part, you are introduced to people gradually and as they are relevant to the story. The only bit where my brain was kind of trying to switch off and I was really having to concentrate was the Council of Elrond. This is this massive, massive chapter where the Fellowship is formed. I think the chapter is something like 15,000 words, and in that chapter there were a lot of man names, a lot of kings, a lot of disputes and history stuff, and that's what I thought the whole book was going to be like. So that wasn't my favourite bit, but I am just glad the whole book wasn't like that. So that chapter aside, and like acknowledging that it was necessary to set up the rest of the story, I really enjoyed Fellowship. I like a story where you get a group together that wouldn't normally meet and they go on a quest, and that is what happens here. And I enjoyed all the characters. It is a shame that they are all men. There are 5 women across both of these parts of the novel, I think, and Arwen hasn't spoken yet, so it's not great on that front. But the rest of it I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I would, and looking back I don't know why I thought I wouldn't like it. And something that surprised me, I knew there were songs and poems in Lord of the Rings. I knew Tolkien wrote poetry. I didn't know how many songs there were. I think pretty much every character recites a poem, comes up with a poem on the spot, or sings a song at least once at some point in the story. And before I'd kind of thought, what a mad idea to turn Lord of the Rings into a musical. But now, having read some of it, it actually makes a lot more sense, because there are so many songs. Music and storytelling through poetry and song are such a huge part of the story, and that kind of leads it beautifully into being a musical. And so, let me tell you about the show. First of all, the Watermill Theatre is such an incredible venue. It is, as the name suggests, an old mill, and it's just the most beautiful sight. There's a garden as you go in, and the first part and the end of the show are in another bit of garden, and it's just such a gorgeous space. The Watermill also lost all, I think, of their arts funding quite recently, and this seems like just such a bold thing for them to be like, you know what, we're going to do this huge epic show that no one else has been brave enough to bring back, because why not at this point? The first half an hour before the show properly starts is where most of those clips were from. You are at Bilbo's birthday party and the ensemble are there as hobbits at the party, and they bring out games and they are talking to members of the audience and seeing if anyone's got any snacks on them and having a chat and dancing and playing their instruments. And it was just one of the most joyous half hours I have ever spent. I turned to my boyfriend at one point and I was like, I just want to live in this half an hour. I don't think I stopped smiling the whole time. It was amazing. It is exactly the feeling I think you should get from this kind of theatre. And then the show started for real. We start, as the book starts, at Bilbo's birthday. Bilbo vanishes, leaves Frodo the ring, and everything from there goes off at like 1,000,000 miles an hour. Because when you consider the audiobooks, if you put the three together for the full novel, I think it's over 60 hours of story, and the films are several hours each. And here you're trying to condense all of that into 3 hours. They're also limited by the fact that this is such a tiny little stage once you get inside, which is where most of the show takes place. It is this gorgeous but tiny, tiny little theatre, and that means they can't show stuff in full epicness. There is a limited size to the cast. The cast are also all actor musicians because you can't fit a band on that stage as well. And that I actually loved. It just kind of worked in that space. It all felt kind of rustic, and I described it later as it felt like a group of really talented friends got together, brought all the instruments they played. They're all massive Lord of the Rings fans, and they said, I reckon we could do a musical of that. Let's go. And it's just so warm. It's not a perfect telling of the story. It's a really loving, very condensed telling of the story. And that does mean necessarily you have to lose certain moments and certain characters. For example, all of Rohan is gone, because how were they going to do horses on that stage? That does mean, sadly, you lose Éowyn. We don't get Tom Bombadil and the whole walk through the woods. We really are going through the main bits that affect what happens next. There are certain bits, because of the pace of it, where if you didn't know the story, you wouldn't necessarily know straight away what was going on. Things like when they are running to the river on the way to Rivendell, and the riders arrive and then the river comes up and sweeps them away. That was done with this big flash of blue light, and the riders went off and Frodo starts swimming, and you kind of have to piece it together. I was like, oh, there's the bit of the river. But if you didn't know that, it was just kind of suddenly a lot of things happening and Frodo is swimming on the stage. One of the things I think it was a shame to have to lose was the friendship between Legolas and Gimli. The way they interact and their humour was some of my favourite parts of the book, and that we didn't get. They had a much smaller part dialogue-wise than in the books. They were kind of there for the action, and then their like big moments of drama, and a lot of the friendship feel of the story was focused on the hobbits, particularly Frodo and Sam. Something I didn't realise until I read Two Towers is the first book, because everyone's travelling as a group. You're very much following one storyline and everyone's together. And then at the very start of Two Towers, the Fellowship disbands, the group splits and certain people go off in certain smaller groups. And then, for the entire first book of Two Towers, we are following one group. And then the entire second half, we are with Frodo and Sam and Gollum. So I was reading and I got chapters in, and I was like, where is Frodo? When is this gonna happen? And it is completely split in half. And I liked it more in the show when it's kind of moments of everyone. I get that in the book it means you get to settle in to this story, and you get to kind of keep in your head the information you need for this particular group and what they are encountering. But in the show, where everything is so fast, it made sense to kind of swap between what's actually happening at the same time chronologically. One of the things this show did so well is work with the space they had and the small cast. I already mentioned the actor-musicians, which worked so well to bring music even more into focus in the story. And then there were also the puppets. There were puppets for the Black Riders and for Shelob, and they were incredible, and they were puppeted so well. Shelob was like properly scary, and that really added to the whole storytelling. When Merry and Pippin meet the Ents, the tree people, they are talking to each other, deciding whether they want to get involved in this whole business, and the way they showed them communicating through the forest was they had actors around the theatre. We had one right behind us, and they were playing pipes on the wall to make this sound, and it was little things like that that just made this show such a joy to experience. They also made such effective use of sound and lighting and projections. There was a revolve in the middle of the stage, which in some shows feels like a gimmick. It feels like they've got a revolve, so they need to use it. But in this, because there is so much travelling and fighting, it made so much sense to have a revolve. There's a really fun bit when the hobbits first set off and they are walking around the revolve, and other members of the cast are using their bodies and their musical instruments as like stiles and fences and gates, and all of that was just so well done. And I think all of that really mattered, because if you were just to look at the script, this is not the best musical ever written. It's not the slickest, because you're condensing so much into relatively so little time. It has the potential to not work. As we've seen, it didn't really work in London, although I have seen people that went and absolutely loved it. But it's a risky show to do, and the thing that made this was all the clever things they did with the production, and also the massive talent of the whole cast. I think they all had such a responsibility as well, because these characters are so well known to people that are fans of the story and of the world, and there's that fine line where you want to avoid copying the actors from the film, but you need to make them recognisable, and you need to match people's expectations of these characters. And they're delivering a lot of lines taken straight from the book, which I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't finished reading it that day, I don't think, but given how much they'd had to cut, the dialogue itself, a lot of it was very faithful to the books, which I thought was cool. And so it is delivering it in a way that matches both the feel of the book and the films, while also making the parts their own. Louis Maskell, who was Frodo, I'm a huge fan of his anyway. This is the third show I've seen him in. The last thing I saw him in was The Grinning Man, which is a show that not enough people went to see. He was exceptional, and there are some bits in this show where you can see his character from The Grinning Man. The way he moves, his physicality, and the things he can do with his face, and the intensity at certain points, he's just brilliant. His West Country Hobbit accent was maybe not the best I've ever heard, but I think you can forgive that when he is just such an incredible actor to watch. And I think especially in this theatre, whichever seats you're in, you're pretty close to the stage. So when everyone is giving these performances, you are so close and you can fully appreciate everything they're doing. I thought Ewan Hugh Pereira was a lovely Sam. They made him a bit less bumbling than in the book. Again, I think there just isn't time for all his comic moments. He has to be a lot more capable, but he did such a beautiful job towards the end of the show when, let's be honest, Sam ends up becoming the hero. None of it would have ended well without Sam's strength and his dedication, and that really came across. Georgia Louise as Galadriel, her voice is incredible. Galadriel, in my opinion, has the two best songs in the whole show, and she sung them so well. I do think they hadn't made Galadriel quite as majestic and ethereal as she comes across in the book. I know that's hard to do when she is an actor on a stage and not an actual elf, but I thought costuming wise maybe could have done a bit more. And I think when she was singing there were moments where they really upped the reverb on her voice so that she kind of sounded everywhere, and that was perfect. I think they could have done with that every time she sang so that she didn't just sound like a very, very talented lady. You got that like, okay, she is mega powerful. On the subject of Galadriel, I do appreciate that this show has tried to rectify the issue of women in the novel. Arwen actually gets to speak, and she gets 2 songs. Galadriel is there in all her vocal glory, and we have Emilia Gabriel as Pippin, which worked really well, having a female actor as Pippin. The dynamic was still there, it wasn't like ruined because it wasn't the group of lads on the trip. She fit really well into the character. If I talk about each actor and each character, I will be here forever. Suffice it to say, I thought they all did a really good job. I thought they like met the energy and the character from the books. I can't really remember the films if I'm honest, but there wasn't anyone where I was like, oh, I didn't think... Oh, maybe Saruman, I don't know whether this was direction or the actor, wasn't quite as menacing as he feels in the books. It's kind of hard to get across a powerful wizard. Again, limitations of a stage production, but I just thought he could have been a bit more ominous, maybe. Last actor I have to mention is Matthew Bugg as Gollum. Everyone that has watched the films or listened to the audiobook has such an idea in their head of Gollum, and so it's such a challenge to sort of honour that, but also not just copy what Andy Serkis did. And he did such an incredible job with this character. From his first entrance, where you hear Gollum somewhere, and then you turn and he is climbing along the balcony of the theatre. There wasn't a second where he was not fully Gollum. He is climbing everywhere. He is singing upside down. There's always that creepiness in his movements, and his voice was so spot on. Gollum sings in this show. He has a song and he keeps the Gollum voice, and yet just the physicality of that part was amazing. I just want to go again to see him crawling around everywhere and scaring people by hanging above their heads. So as you can tell, I enjoyed this theatre trip immensely. It was not perfect. It was not without its issues. If you want perfect Lord of the Rings, read the book, watch the film, whatever your version of perfect is out of those two. If you want a really fun evening where it feels like everyone involved in making this show has so much love for the original material, then that's what you get. And I was wondering, given that all the issues I think I had with it were in condensing the story into 3 hours and the limitations of the space, you cannot do enormous battles with a 20 actor musician cast. You can't get the big magic moments. You cannot get the sense of an army moving. You can't get all the epic lore and history. And I was wondering whether it would work to have this show as like a play in a play, because you start with a few minutes of narration to kind of set you up for things to start, and it ends with a narrated summary of what happens to everyone at the end. And so I think what would be quite fun is if the whole thing was a play. If instead of starting at Bilbo's 11th birthday party, as fun as it was to kind of be part of that and feel like you're actually at Bilbo's birthday, to have it as like an anniversary party. Have it as every year in the Shire, people get together on Bilbo and Frodo's birthday to tell this story. This is like generations in the future, I'm imagining. And they put on a play of the story. And so all the people at the start who are hobbits are then going into these characters and they're telling each other the story. And I think that would get over a lot of the issues. Then it wouldn't matter that the hobbits are not half the size of the elves. It wouldn't matter that the battles are like 12 people dancing instead of actually like mauling each other. It wouldn't matter if people's accents slip. I just think that would make a lot of sense, and I think it means that in the moments like the bit with the river and like with Gollum and the ring at the very end at Mount Doom, you could have someone stepping up for a second, coming out of character or putting their instrument down and narrating a couple of lines. It wouldn't add any time to the show, I don't think, and it would just help with the clarity of it all. And I think it would be cute, just the idea that these hobbits get together and they decide who's going to play who this year, and they've made their own costumes. That would also deal with my issue about Galadriel's costume. I think that would make a lot of sense if they were putting on a play. I enjoy that idea. Obviously that's not what they've done, but I'm now imagining it, looking back, as that's what it was. But overall, if you go into this knowing it's limited in what it can do and ready to just enjoy what it is and enjoy these exceptional performances and just be in a space where there is this huge amount of admiration for this story, it is truly one of the most enjoyable shows you can go and see at the moment. I think I'm going to have a bit of a break before I read Return of the King, just because I am anticipating that one's going to be a lot more political and battle heavy, and that is where you start to lose me with epic fantasy. So I'm gonna go and read a romance or something, and then I am gonna finish this. I am gonna finish the novel. Let me know if you've seen it, or if you think you absolutely don't want to see it, if you've seen it and never read the books, if you've read the books and are planning to go and see it. Just tell me if you have thoughts. And I need to book myself in for some other theatre as well, so I can keep talking to you about theatre and books. So hopefully I will be back with something else in the future. In the meantime, happy books, happy theatre, look after yourselves. Bye!